We're going to be talking about the foundations of pastoral ministry, but particularly as a topic, we're building effective ministry structures. That's what I've been asked to do. I wanted to say to you as we work through this that the way I've planned it, that I will stop from time to time as we go through from beginning to end, so that you've got some times to reflect on what I've been teaching. But I will stop, and you'll have a chance to continue, and we'll continue on. It's a very interesting subject, and you'll find that it's been a one which is in my heart, and how much I've written books about, and how I've been in it by myself. And to begin, I want you to begin to reflect on the distinction between leadership and ministry. You'll get this as we go through and what we talk about, but it's something which many, many people have never understood. There is a difference between ministry and leadership. What I've given to you as we have a look at it, that it is a necessity to understand the distinction between ministry and leadership. But so let's move along, and I've given to you a diagram, and it relates to the distinctions between ministry. And I wanted you to look at them as we go ahead. For example, if you look at it carefully, first of all, I talk about ministry, and I give to you a definition of what I understand to be what is ministry. This is what I've written. It says, ministry is any activity which serves the needs of the people. Let me say that again. Ministry is any activity which serves the needs of the people. Now, I've given just some examples of what therefore ministry is. I said preaching is ministry, teaching is ministry, counselling is ministry, praying is ministry, visiting, and how significant that is at the moment. Feeding is ministry, washing or cleaning. Now, that's just one of probably 50 or 60 or 100 different ways in which ministry can occur. But I want you to get that, to think about, what is my ministry? Or am I receiving ministry? So that's, I think, quite clear. But then, as you can see, I say leadership is any activity that directs, influences, or facilitates ministry by others. And I give some examples. Therefore, leadership is planning. Leadership is decision-making. Leadership is personal selection. Leadership is vision setting. Now, I could give you another 20 or 30 words which reflect on leadership, but I want you to be able to see just the reality. They're not the same. And I in a few minutes, I'm going to stop, and I want you to think, are you involved in ministry? Are you involved in leadership? Or are you involved in both? But before we go further on that, as I would always do, and particularly for you, who I'm assuming it may be the first time you've heard me teach, you may or may not want to have read some of my books. There are 7 written, and there are more every year. So just a little bit about me. I can tell you, as it relates to me, first thing I would say that I went to Fiji when I was only 46 years old, but I was sent to start as a leader, a new department of one of the biggest accounting firms. That for me was my first experience of leadership. When I came back, I started a Bible college and became the principal of that college. I was teaching, doing ministry, but at the same time I had a responsibility to be the leader. After I finished that 5 years in that college, I started planting churches, and the first of which was in Lane Cove. Another one was Ryde. Another one was Carlingford, and it ultimately came 3 separate churches, but and I was involved in the start of the ministry called C3. Pastor Phil and I and two others had that joy whilst we were ministering our own churches. At the same time, we were leading and developing something like we would say a movement. When I finished doing that, I was asked by Alpha Crucis to come in and start to develop a course on leadership, which has been going on now for 15 years. It's different, but what's happening, on one hand, I'm teaching, on the other hand, it's developing leadership. And then lastly, what's called the Jagelman Institute, where I have done consulting and mentoring and a whole lot of things. So, I'm going to stop, and I'd like you to think about, who am I? What do I know about myself in terms of ministry and leadership? Now we begin to talk in very practical terms. You know, how do we develop leadership? How do we develop ministry? But in particular, the question is about how to build structures. So it's going to be very practical. For some of this, you may be familiar with it a lot. But for some people, some of you will never have experienced it, never read it, heard about it. So it'll be very practical, and that's what this is all about. So, the first tool I want to talk about are what I call flow charts, and you can see it. On there what I'm talking about. But I show to you what a flow chart looks to. So let's just walk down, talk about it, and what it's actually showing. And it starts from the top to the bottom. There is a flow, and this is the way it works. You have an authority. It starts on the top with the board. And in other words, anyone, any organisation, anything you do which is under the board, that is, the board has the authority, and you must respect them. But as you move down, the first person under the board is the senior leader, or other terms for that kind of role, that leader. And so, yes, he is under the board, but then anyone under he has the authority, and these other people under the authority of the pastor. So I've put in some now. In some churches, you might have 20 or 30 of these, and much broader than I put in. But I've just shown, in other words, the leader, the director of the children's ministry. Let's hold on. Under the seniors pastor, I put in there, and you should see it. It's what's called the staff executive. In other words, going this way, the board has the greatest authority, and then the leader is under the board. But then there's this staff executive, which will be people who are leaders, and they will do in have meetings and various things, which I'll talk about. But so you've got three levels in this flow: board, senior pastor, and then staff executives. And under this, you get these lists. The director's children is under that board. The youth director is under the executive. The music director is under the executive. The pastoral director, the administrator, over and over and over. It's something you look at, and what's helpful for you if you're in a church or in a charity or something like that, it'll be helpful for you to think, okay, I wonder what it looks like in our organisation. Is there a boarder? Is there a senior executive? Is there a staff? Whatever. But that's one form of it. On the other hand, so what we can say about this is we can change it. And here's another one. It's different, but it's the same kind. And it's helpful for you. In this case, you have a board, then you have a senior pastor, then you have an executive, but also there you have administration and finance. Something new has come into it. And so what needs to be said in the case of the first chart, the diagram depicts who is accountable to who. In the second of these, what's happening is the interrelationships between various things. So if you look at it again, may well be music will be related for doing church things. It might be related to youth, whatever. You'll find there are things going between the ministries, but so this kind is not about authority, it's about how they work together to do what they need to do. So, what I'd like to do, and again, we'll have a stop, and to ask, try and look at these diagrams and say, where am I? Now you might say, well, I go to the church, I go to services, I go to youth ministry. You might say, I don't have a ministry, but I'm doing something. Others might say, oh, I'm in the first one because I'm a leader of youth ministry and so on. And so try and position yourself, because this as we work our way through this course, it'll be helpful, because design these things well, follow well, and they're very effective in building structures. So again, I'm going to stop, allow you to take some time, and then we'll carry on. Just before we transit from where we're going to there to new ideas, one of the things I used to think about when I was reflecting on what we just talked about, because leadership in this sense is really about accountability. Who's accountable to who? But of course leaders will do more than that, and we'll talk more about it. On the other hand, these relatedness is ministry. So we can begin to see, might be involved in leadership, might be involved in ministry. But there's more than that. And what I put in here is like there's a developing, whether your ministry needs to be improved or your leadership needs to be improved. There is this sense of mentoring, and it will raise questions of the levels of complexity and development in pathways. I'll say more than that, but I will say, if you're really going to build something strong, there will be need for training. It's as you can see, maybe you've had talking or whatever, but the sort of thing and the content in a lecture like this is really about helping you to develop it. But let's turn on now to the next issue. The question is, as we see it, that there are policies. And you might be thinking, well, what's a policy? Maybe you think about it. But I want to say even more than that, that there are policy documents. And to really build what we're trying to achieve, there is the need for policy documents. So the elders, or the board, or what term you use, will need to have policy documents. Secondly, the senior pastor or leaders, they may not be in the board, but they are leading a particular ministry. They will need documents. And the executive team, they also will. They'll need this. Now, the question is, what kind of document? What is it? As a consultant and to many churches around or various parts of the world, how people, often leaders, will hold things in their eyes or in their ears or in their heads or whatever it might be about what they think is the policy, but the people underneath them don't really know what is the policy. Well, two things are important as to what is policy. Firstly, let me give to you a definition of what is a policy. This comes. Let me hear it. This is a definition policy. It's a statement that expresses the intended standards of behaviour and practice of an organisation, including behaviour. It's even more than that. It expresses. In other words, if I come into a church, if I get put a position in a charity, I need to know what are the policies. And it's, in the case of policy, the issue is what's intended to be my behaviour, or what is intended in the people with me, what is their behaviour. Can't just think about it. You can't just tell people about it. It needs to be a document. And it's what is appropriate, but it's more than that. Secondly, we need to understand about the word system. System is a specific methodology for organising activities in order to achieve a purpose. Now that's different, right? It goes on and says, this involves flows of work, information, money, people, materials, equipment. The system provides the framework within those flows taking place. Now what am I talking? I can draw a picture of what it looks to have, what we've looked at, and looked at this and, okay, this is the way the flows work. This is a document, but this is needed to actually know. It's interesting when people come into a church, particularly if they're going to come into ministry, and maybe they become into the leadership, by no means do the people who come in have any understand really of what is the policy. And if they're going to live the behaviour of this church, they must have a decent way of understanding what that is. And so as we stop again, because we're going to, because I want you to be able to think about the question, I want you to stop and think about ministries you're involved in or positions you're over, and ask yourself the question, what's the policy? And if they don't say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, what's the document? And they say, well, there's no documents. There may be in the head of the leader, but it's a very poor thing, and it's something which needs to be dealt with. But the problem comes that often even the senior pastor doesn't know how to write a policy. Has never done it. And I just very quickly tell a story of a pastor in North Australia, and he was talking about policies, and he said, hey, no, I kind of know what I want, but I feel like we should have, but I've never written a document like that. And he said, can you write it for me? And I said, no, I can help you on the issues in the house, but it's something you should do. And I said, well, you must have someone in your church who has a role of developing these policies. And he says, no, up here there's no one in my church. I said, that's not true. He says, no. I said, that's not true. And I did it 3 times. He says, Ian, what do you mean? And I said, do you have someone in this local school? And he says, yes. And I said, is she in a role? And he says, yes, this lady is the deputy principal of the school. Yes. What does she do? And the pastor said, I don't know. I said, well, part of the role of a deputy principal is writing policies just like this. So, again, we're going to stop, but I want you to begin to think of some areas of what you're doing. What do you think is the behavior acceptable? Think about even writing for it. So, you think, little break, and we'll continue. Okay, this time we shift from the concept of policy to the concept of role. How do you describe the role which you give to somebody? What do you believe is the role you have? It's different because policy may be how something's done, but the role needs to be really clear as to what the purpose is. And what's interesting, I want to observe to you that there are 3 different kinds of roles. The first is that of people. And the question is, what are they trying to achieve? What if I'm in ministry or if I'm in leadership? The question for me, what are we trying to achieve? And I was thinking about it, and a leader who's a young ministry may have been in ministry, but have never really understood what the clear understanding is. What is your role? And in many cases, if you've been in ministry, you have never been really told. You've been told what to do, but that's not the same of what it's really for. That's people. That's one form of it. And often many people only think that roles relate to people. But that's not true. In organisations, there are meetings. And this is an interesting one. I, as a consulting, was talking from Western Australia, talking one of their senior pastors, and I asked one day, okay, in a month, how many meetings do you go to? and he thought it through. He said, I go to 22 meetings a month. Oh boy, who'd want to be like it? But he was in about 3 different levels. He was in the national organisation of an organisation. At one level he was going, and then there were state groups he went to, and then there's a local one, and then there's the church, and then it's in ministry. So what's important is to recognise and write what is the purpose of the meeting. In talking, again, in consulting and in the process as a mentor and so on, I remember asking a person, what's the one meeting you go to which you least like going? And person said to me, it's this meeting on a Wednesday around lunchtime as senior leaders, that's what we go to. And you get least out of it. I said, oh, that's interesting. And in the course of a couple of days, I interviewed about 25 different people. I asked the same question. They're all in various different organisations or what they're doing. When they came to the question, they all gave the same answer. And then that is to say that I hate going to this meeting, it's such a waste of time. And then I remember talking to them and saying, what is the purpose of the meeting? And each of them told me what happened. And I said, I didn't ask you what you do. I asked you the question of purpose. And they were, well, aren't they the same? No. It may be 4 years ago, 5 years earlier, that meeting had a very important purpose. But since then, that there's no need for that kind of meeting. But we go because that's the way we've been put into it. So meetings should have a purpose, and their purposes will change. And like if you're involved in a children's ministry, you may have meetings and you may kind of go, this is what we do, and you go every week or every month and whatever. No. But the ministry is growing and growing and growing, and there needs to be redesign of meetings. So people can have roles, meetings can have roles, but so too are the boards. That's the top, the most senior people. What's the purpose of the board? And it's interesting, it's many people I've talked to who may have been asked to be on the board and have felt very exciting that they've been asked to become an elder or whatever it might be. In there, that they're willing to do it, but there's no clarity, nothing in writing is the purpose of the board. And even more than that, if that's not properly be designed and that actually happen, there's often a clash between what someone in the church on a Sunday might believe it's his purpose or her purpose, where the board member or a member board might feel, no, that's mine. And often there's conflict between the two. But the obvious one, one of the obvious ones, was the whole issue of Sunday services, and when some people like the loud noise in singing, and others wanted to be quieter, and the elder may came and asked the person, please turn it down. But the person says, but you're not above me. I'm under the authority of the senior ministry. And you can see how easily it can happen where you get these kinds of the need of what is the purpose of the board. So, again, I've given you enough in terms of this, for you to begin to think as a person, what am I, and I might be a leader in a ministry or some part of it, what is my purpose? What am I trying to achieve? And that should be able to be put into paper. What's the purpose for the meetings? They can be written, agreed to. It's really important. The board's the same. There's so often conflict between the senior pastors and the board. Sometimes the conflict is between the ministry and the administrator, whatever it might be. So again, let's take a break again. I want to introduce you to a concept. Happens to have been designed by a friend of mine, and Dr. Wonderful, he's a lovely Christian, outstanding designer. Is used around the world and in Australia and in very big places about trying to help people in terms of the processes and plannings to achieve strategic buildings. So organisations can grow, so ministries can grow and develop. It's interesting, I have a saying which says ministry builds people, but leadership builds buildings or churches and whatever. And he uses a term, ABCD. Now I want to talk a little bit about it, particularly because it's talking about terms like strategy. Now he has, and I actually haven't put this in because I wanted to talk to you about it. What he does, he takes the letters A, B, C, D, and he asks 4 basic questions, but they all related to the A, B, C, and D. A is what are our aspirations? Where are we at the moment? What is the state of our organisation, be it a church or a ministry, whatever it may be? How would you assess A? Is it good? Is it struggling? Is it going back? Is it growing? An honest assessment of A. B is, but what do we really want to be? What do we want to see happen in the future? Now, if you're not honest about A, about how things really are going, this whole concept doesn't work, and you don't learn and you're not helped. So you've got to be really honest. Your particular ministry might be really struggling, or whatever it might be. That's the A. B, then, is where do we want to be? Where would you like to be in 5 years' time? I can remember as a senior pastor of a church in Mortonton, 1,000 people. I can remember we had these goals. We wanted to have 100 when we first started in the first year of the church, and then we hoped that we might get to 200, then we might get to 250, and then we came to 300. But the issue we had, it was more than a goal. It's actually a desire to set, to go. And so you can set it up, and you may not know whether you've got the resources, you may not know whether you ever will have the capacity to do it. But in the model, you start with being honest, and B, you being able to describe what you really want to have. And C is interesting because so often, interestingly, after B has been said, people want to do C in the sense that they want to, okay, let's get a plan. In fact, you can use terms like you can talk about not just that kind of thinking, but the fact that is it right? Well, the answer is, what is it that you really think would make the most help for the organisation? See, a lot of people might say, oh, we have music, we want lots and lots of monies on money and equipment and everything else like that. And in an early stage, it may be really good. It comes to a point, but you can spend money on it, but you've got really good things already. And for the church or the organisation to grow, it may need, what is strategic? What is it that if we can do it strategically, it's better to do what, not just what we like, but doing something. And then D, then only after you can make decisions, I think this would be strategic, then do you start to do. So it's a model. Tony Goldsby Smith, he and I have worked together. I can remember when I met him, and for various reasons, and my oldest son began to go out with his daughter, and we began to be friends, and I was writing my first book, and I said, Tony, I said, it's my first book, you're a specialist in education, can you have a look at it? He had a quick look, and then he said, if you can tell me why, when we attempted to build a church, why it went to 250 people and then fell to about 50 in close. If you can tell me, why, what we were doing something good didn't work. And I was able to say to him, hey, the reality was they were all good in ministry, but none of them was good in leadership. And it was good. And so again, it's just a small one, but I want to give you again the time to think about, and you'll see more. And if you read my books, like the L Factor, there's a lot of what we're going. There's much more in the book, one of the books. So, but the question is, are you really? Have you got A, B, C, D? Maybe it needs to be A, C, B, D before. You need to make sure what is really strategic. So you stop, think about what's going on, and then we'll continue. This time we're looking at leadership development pathways. I want to talk to you about 5 different levels of leadership. Now, if we were talking ministry, you might say, can you help me just do, and you might then, would you do this on this and then, but you might see in ministry, they do different things. But in the case of leadership, there has to be capacity to do it. There are various things people can do and those who they can't do. And so let's look at the 5 levels of leadership. Number 1 is leading a small group or leadership. I've gone into with organisations. It could be up in Newcastle, and it may be about mining or whatever it is, and they all have. It might be a team or a small group, and there'll be someone leading such like that. not high up in the organisation. And the same is also true in Christian organisations. We would say like our groups where people will go to once every 2 weeks or whatever it might be, the leading of a small group. It involves certain capacities, but it's not particularly demanding, and probably 90% of people can function at level 1. The next level is what's required, the supervisor who can be over and above level 1. So you have a team leader who's volunteered, nearly always, to lead a group, is struggling, but they need to have someone above them who can supervise that what is the purpose of these groups is really clear, and maybe at this level 2, this level, in discussing between the leader of the group and the supervisor, things may emerge which they know, but the senior pastor doesn't know and may not know, and there may be major things go wrong. The first level, understood. Second level, began to see all the other groups are having the same problem. It's an important role at level 2. Level 3 are leaders of ministry. So, yes, that person will need to have the skills, whether you're working in children or whether you're working in music or whatever it might be. It is a ministry. And by being in ministry for 40 years, and from being very young and growing up and now as an older, I've had all sorts of ministry which I've done. But in the end, ultimately, I found myself as a senior leader, mainly being leaders of leaders rather than leaders of the people who are in ministries. In fact, the groups we talked about earlier is if they have a group, an executive group, these will be leaders of particular ministries, and if there's lots of them, these people may in fact supervise people for 4 or 5 ministries. They will help and making sure all's going well. Level 4 is the level of team leadership, where a leader ceases to be not just being the only leader, but someone who will be over other people who are in positions of leadership. And you may actually find that underneath them, again, and you may get a leadership of a particular ministry, but it's different. And it's interesting how things grow. One of the research things we did years ago, it made it clear if a youth ministry only had one leader, it never grew. That they would normally have lots of people helping in ministry, but there'd be a leader of the ministry, and then you'd have other ministers. So it's important. And then you get to the issue of the leader of leaders. What happens, and it's often seen like working your way up into serious leadership. You start leading a group, then you might become a supervisor, then you may be the leader over a particular ministry. And after this, when we need to have leaders of leaders, it'll be out from that group, people soon to be able to do it, who will become into an executive team. They won't necessarily go into the eldership or the board for various reasons because they have other skills, but it's different. 5 levels of leadership. Small group, the easiest. Supervising, important. 3, the leader, becomes more and more. Part of a leadership team, and then the leaders of them all. What I will tell you, that is a process which we'll go through, and in serious leadership, there's a lot more you can read and study. I recommend you my books, which will help you. But where are you? Where are you? Would you say, I'm only involved in ministry and not involved in leadership? That's fine. Are you doing positions of leadership? At what level? Because you'll probably find you'll need to more than have the position, but have help for the position. So, take some time, reflect, and I'll see you soon. This time we're going to talk a little bit about belief and development. The word praxis is learning what you're going to do, not just what you're going to believe in your mind. So it's important that what you believe about how you can do it. It's one thing to say, I believe I want to be in ministry, but how am I going to do it? And often people go into a position and try and do with what there was the belief of somebody else who was in the same position. And you really don't believe in it. And it's important to understand. But it's there. The belief is not just theological. It is about praxis. It's about how you do something. Secondly, theology is what to believe in God's kingdom. And it's important for leaders, they will need to understand what they believe is what is God's will. And it's there, it's not for this course or this lecture, but it's important. Thirdly, what's the capacity of your complexity? Now, again, I can say to you that is a whole lecture all of its own. But I will say to you that there is a discovery process as to know how much can I cope with complexity. I can maybe cope with level 1, I might struggle a little at level 2, but you may not be able to cope at level 3. So you will discover your capacity. Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit more. Yes, you can get training. Yes, you can get skills. But there are certain things in the function of making decisions involves a capacity very few people have it. I would say that, for example, if I said to you, I think there's about 5% of pastors in Australia capable with the capacity to have a church more than 60 people, you might look at me and that can't be true. Well, I'm sorry, it is true, and that's the reality. It's not just doing things, it's something about yourself, and that's something you need to develop. Point 4, visionary capacity. Are you a person who's got the capacity to be visionary? Not just do other things well, but see what could happen and be. Again, it becomes at a high level of complexity. Your ability to see something, not just guessing, just doing what the guy down the road or whatever it might be, but it is something which you can see inside. It will develop if you've really got it. Skilled hands is a different thing. Skilled hands that even at the highest level, many leaders will still read, or they'll still have mentors. And I've been mentoring leaders over 20 years, and some in the marketplace, sometime in the church. And they may still say, even though if I've mentored for 10 years, they've asked to say, Ian, you go with me. And if I were to say to you, the head of the largest department of a church in another country, despite who he was, what he had done, and everything else like that, he felt he needed to have skilled hands into new roles. And don't just think it's something you should be able to, you have to learn the question, can I? Seventhly is the issue of intent, is the intelligence strength. Can you really think? Can you think through? Can you take enough data and everything else, being able to put it through and to put it in? Because if you're sitting and you're thinking, well, hold on, our church is big, we can't go anymore. Should we expand the size of our building? Should we sell it and buy someone else? Or all sorts of different things which are going in. It's an important part in terms of development. And lastly, EQ, which is emotional intelligence. Wonderful, highly intellectual people who are wonderful in that sense, but just cannot think in the way you need to as a leader. And so, it's the fact I'm saying is that to do what you want to do in terms of this course, you need to understand the journey you are on. So again, just do a little bit of thinking about yourself and thinking about those 8 things. And some of you say, Ian, I know nothing about it. Well, read more about it. Some of you say, oh, that's me. And then maybe you're thinking, I really think I can, but I still need help. Just a very, very small statement. It relates to the developing in ministry. I think there's 3 steps along the way. First of all, you need to discover your ministry. And I want to say to you, you won't know who you are in ministry in the first 2 or 3 years. People may tell you, but you really won't. It'll take 4 or 5 years. But that's first of all, but you do want to discover who are really good in ministry. Secondly, you in a particular ministry, you will then want people to help you and develop with you together. The training you get for leadership won't necessarily help you in how you minister to people who maybe they can't hear or whatever it might be. So it's a second step. They will take training. And thirdly, the issue of office needs to be recognised. In other words, by that I mean, if you've got it right, this is my gift. Have I been developing? Yes. Then you need to find people who are willing then to put you into an office or a position so that you can really do it. It's sadly often people who've got a gift, have trained for it, are put into another role, and it's not a good thing. So just a little thing. You could think about it afterwards because I've just got one more thing to say. But think about you in yourself, where you're at, and this will help you to say, I need to be through the A, B, and C. So, again, a little stop, and then for the last one. I wanted to finish with a particular issue of leading, and that's, I've called it leading in times of change. Again, it's simple, but it's very powerful, and it's essential. And so, what do you need to do? First of all, you need to discover, search, do we need to change? There may only be one or two people who can see there needs to be change, and other people just don't see it, but it's there. Secondly, there is a need for discovering the nature of change. What do we need to change? Because it's one thing to say, we've got to change, but if you don't know what you should do, knowing isn't enough. Thirdly, once you've got the discovery of the nature of changes, it's important to reinforce changes after they're made. Because I can say to someone, we need to change, you'll need to change. They say they will change, but a year later they're going back to the old way because they were not given the reinforcement when they were led through change. There are three stages of change, and it's clear. This is the way it works. Stage number one, the fact that there's going to be a change and it's announced, so we all know it's going to change. Stage one. Stage two, it's changed, but inside of me, I still don't feel, I'm not sure that's really the right thing of change. I mean, it's done. I didn't have to say. But for many people, you might have, like, when we've gone out, taken our church and major changes, we've had 80%, 90% absolutely not just agreeing with it, but they've accepted it. But there may have been 10% who haven't said no, but they haven't embraced it as well. And so then there's the third level, accepting the change or leaving. And often, maybe 2 years or 3 years later, those people who went through level one, got to two, never got us to level three. And what happened is they left. Or their behaviour was such, they were asked that you can't do what you've always done. Well, I hope you've enjoyed it. As a course, some of the books, that's 3 of my books on leadership. I've got other books on biblical studies and so on. You can get ebooks from Amazon on all of these courses. At the college, Alpha Crucis, my institute is there, and we can sell books if you wish. Many of them do. So it's been a pleasure, and I hope I've left lots of you to think, but I hope it's more than that it changes you and strengthens you. So God bless you.